So I think we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully we'll have some other people join us. We're still testing out, times of the day and days of the month and things like that will work. So this is a lunch and learn one that we decided to go ahead and do. And my name is Linda Akey, and I own Competent Assistance for Nonprofits. And I took over the Networking for Nonprofits Meetup last year when the person who was doing it decided he didn't want to do it anymore. So I went ahead and decided to pay Meetup and keep it going. But we didn't really do anything until last month when James was like, hey, why don't we do something? And I said, sure. So I'm fine with doing that. And I'm really glad that James has stepped up to share his variety of information, his plethora of information. So he did the workshop last month on volunteer management, I believe it was. And this month we'll be talking about donor stewardship a little bit. And we'll, just as people want topics, I've given workshops on a million different topics. So, I'm happy to do that. I assist new nonprofit organizations in getting started. I write the Form 1023, Form 1024. I do strategic planning, board development, budgeting, volunteer management, just anything involved with running and operating a nonprofit. I had co-founded my own nonprofit at one point out in Colorado, and just, pretty much I'm the nonprofit lady. I know a lot of stuff about nonprofits and been involved for my entire life pretty much. So that's what I do. So I'd like to go around. We'll do James last because he's going to kind of introduce himself and go right into the topic. So BC, why don't you tell us about who you are and what you do and about your nonprofit and your mission?
I'm BC. My birth name is Brian, but my grandpa always called me BC, and it's a nickname that just always kind of stuck. My nonprofit is called A World Empowered, and basically we help people who like helping people to help more people. For 15 years, I ran a custom furniture business, a brick and mortar store. It's actually where Linda and I met. She was one of my customers. I built her some furniture, developed a great friendship with her over the years doing that. And then in 2016, I shut that down, spent a year traveling out of a backpack around third world developing countries. And everywhere I went, I found an opportunity to make a difference and decided to come back and start my own nonprofit. And Linda is everything she says she is and a lot more. She's fantastic, an incredible resource, a great friend, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if not for her. So basically, A World Empowered raises money through the sales of my book and speaking engagements to help facilitate the growth of other nonprofits. I decided rather than putting my hand into the coffers and applying for the same grants that other nonprofits are doing, and rather than starting projects from scratch, that I would dedicate A World Empowered to helping other nonprofits succeed. So that's what I do.
Yeah, and he's an artist, and he's written books, this amazing book that's absolutely incredible. So the Dream Achiever, right?
Yep.
And yeah, so he's really amazing, does a lot of really great stuff. You have a podcast, and he does a lot of workshops and speaking and things like that as well. So he's got a lot of hands in the fire there. So
I juggle a lot of balls. I get bored easy. I have ADD, so I need a lot of fun things to keep me entertained and distracted, and art and speaking and podcasting workshops and all the fun stuff is really what inspires me. And if I find a way to put that all together in a way to raise money to help do some good around the world, then I'm happy.
Great, thank you. And Jason, why don't you tell us about yourself and about your interest in nonprofits, or what you'd like to maybe get out of this session today?
Now that I've got the mute off, yeah, hi, I'm Jason Lang. I used to work in Sacramento for a firm that helped nonprofits do legislative stuff. So we tracked bills, we lobbied on their behalf, we, gave testimonies, we gathered information, helped draft language, the whole package. And then my wife's job took us away, and then we moved to a different place, and then ended up in Seattle just before the pandemic hit. And I'm trying to find paying work, but it's been
hard.
very interesting.
Yeah,
I currently serve on the board for the Beacon Hill Food Forest, and so I'm mostly here for networking and all that. But I could definitely any kind of connections or information always useful.
Jason, you cut out there for a second. Beacon Hill, what is your nonprofit?
Food Forest.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, they're a permaculture installation out there. Gives away 300 and I forget now what the exact number was, but gave away a bunch of food to all the food banks in the area, and basically anybody who wants can come in, pick their own stuff, help tend the fields. It's kind of cool.
That is very cool. And yeah, it is hard when you make that move to a new place. I've been experiencing it as well, but fortunately my business is doing just as well in Washington as it was in Colorado, so that's been good for me.
Unfortunately, my business didn't transfer with me.
Didn't transfer, yeah, that makes it hard. Well, I hope something will come up soon. And Catherine?
Yes, hello, I'm Catherine Mahan, and I am the founder of a nonprofit organization called Home Again VR. We're an online community where members can connect and go on virtual trips together in order to make friends and promote positive human connection. And it's all real conversations. You hear each other's voices, you know each other's names. It's not just, sending messages to one another. And so the members go through these experiences together, seeing interesting pictures, maybe learning some fun facts, which is really a great icebreaker for people to connect with one another, as opposed to just if it's a phone call. And what's most unique about our platform is that every experience is guided by a trained volunteer, making it a very safe community, safe and accessible community to be a part of, as opposed to I don't know if you guys have heard of Omegle or Chat Roulette, where you're kind of just thrown together with any random person and you talk to them and they could be doing something inappropriate. You just don't know who you're going to get. So, we are a very safe and welcoming platform, and it's kind of amazing. We started this program just a few months before COVID hit. So, it was very timely.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. So it's been amazing, the impact we've been able to make. I mean, isolation has been a problem long before COVID. 2017, I believe it was, they did a survey that 150 million people in this country regularly feel lonely and isolated. And of course, this situation has just made it worse. But it's always, they called it the loneliness epidemic. That's what we're trying to address. Yeah, that's our program in a nutshell, Home Again VR.
That's really cool. Do you work with all ages of people? Is it everybody? Because I know that the elderly we've always had problems with loneliness with elderly who are kind of shut in and, not having that kind of access. But a lot of what's been going on also is just people working remotely or things like that, where they're not as, out in the world as much.
Right, absolutely. Well, and yes, the answer is all ages. We've worked from, at this point, it's aged 8 to 102. There are several assisted living communities or retirement communities and senior centers using our program. We also have a children's hospital. So it's really for anybody. And I think connecting people of all ages and walks of life is a big part of our mission.
That's fantastic. What a neat idea. Very cool. Well, thank you guys for being here. And hopefully as time goes by, we'll continue to grow our numbers in this group. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand this over to James, who can introduce himself and let him go into the program. And I know BC will have to drop off soon, but this is being recorded, and so we'll be able to have access to it.
Okay,
so James,
awesome.
Take it away.
Thank you, Linda, and thanks everyone for attending today. Good afternoon. My name is James Burke. I'm with Arctic Consulting, and I'm also with the Mars Society. That's my nonprofit. I used to work at Microsoft, worked there as a technical project manager for many years. And I was also volunteering at the Mars Society on nights and weekends. I'm actually in the middle of running a VR project right now, Catherine, for the Mars Society. It's called Mars VR. We're doing an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign for it right now.
That's awesome.
We've raised $88,000 for it out of our $100,000 goal. And we're gonna bring a VR application into schools and museums that will allow people to explore Mars based on our real life facility in Utah called the Mars Desert Research Station. But what I'd like to talk to you folks about today is the work I do at Arctic. We help nonprofits and for-profit companies with their technology. So let me share my slides. I have a few slides to go through. I promise I will try to not be boring. I know PowerPoint tends to put people to sleep, so I'll make it really interesting if I can. So a little bit about Arctic. We are a Gold Microsoft partner. We've been around since 2018, and we specialize in moving organizations to the cloud. We also do application development and data, all kinds of data and business analytics. Myself and others at the company, we have over 25 years experience with serving on nonprofit boards. So working with nonprofits is kind of part of our DNA as a company. And last year, partially because of COVID, we started our nonprofit consulting practice. And what that does is we can help nonprofits navigate all the different technology offerings that are out there. You may not know this, but if you're a 501c3 organization, you can get free software licenses from Microsoft, Google, and you can get credits from Amazon to host applications in their cloud offering. So we can help you sort through what makes the most sense for your nonprofit, get you applying for these, and then help you utilize them once you are approved for them. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me after the call, and I'd love to help you out. But what I want to talk about is donor management. And donor management, we've developed this nonprofit solutions framework, and you can see donor management's right there in the middle there. This is a roadmap of all the different ways a nonprofit will typically apply technology in 2021 and to improve the activities that they do. So obviously donor management and managing donations is a big part of nonprofits, most nonprofits activities. Also, they work with volunteers. Some nonprofits go after grant proposals. And then all nonprofits sort of have to deal with the bottom rows there, which are dealing with operations and communication and infrastructure and project management or program management. So all of these things, we can help you apply modern technology to improve what you're doing now. So what I'd like to do is talk about donor management. And so when you talk about, it kind of goes without saying, I guess, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that when you're a 501c3 organization, you can receive donations that are tax deductible by the donor. So what that means is if someone donates cash to your nonprofit, they can claim it as a deduction on their taxes and reduce their tax burden. Now, what that means for you as a nonprofit is you need to keep good records, because what happens a lot is that someone donates to you and then they come back 6 or 8 months later as they're doing their tax return and want a receipt of their donation. And if you can't produce that receipt, then they're not going to donate to you again. They're probably going to be a little irritated as well. So having good records is really critical for this. But also, this is an opportunity. When you receive a donation, like there's some opportunity there where you can actually gather information about why the person is donating to you. And you can make use of that information in a lot of different ways to possibly get more money from that person in the future, or understand why that person's donating to you and what's going to be likely for someone else like them to donate to you as well. Another thing that might be interesting for them is if they tell you what program or initiative at your nonprofit they want their donation to go towards, you can then spend that donation on the program and report back to them, hey, you donated $100 towards our initiative. our initiative was very successful, and thank you for helping out. You know, and here's kind of a report on how the initiative went and what your donation went towards. And that giving people that level of transparency will help them feel confidence in giving again, and also confidence that your nonprofit is serious about its mission. So I would advise every nonprofit, if you're going to collect donations, to collect a minimum set of information along with the donation, which is I've listed here on the slide. Another thing that some nonprofits don't do that they should is offer recurring donations. So have a solution that allows a member or a donor to put in a monthly donation or a quarterly donation or an annual donation and have that automatically come to you. There's lots of ways to do this with different software solutions. The one we use at the Mars Society is called Moon Clerk, and it does have a way to set up a monthly donation that a donor can give us, and it would just get deducted right out of their credit card balance every month. They can self-manage it, they can turn it off or delay it if they want to as well. Because if you don't have a solution like that that is automatically set up, what happens is if someone does want to donate to you every month, they have to remember it and they might forget. And so you're probably losing donations if you don't have a solution like that. So kind of receiving donations is something to think through. There are lots of different providers out there to receive donations. When I talk to nonprofits, I like to talk about how they're going to use the donation afterwards. And that may feed into the choice of how they collect the donations as well. Now, another thing that's really critical is to look at who your donors are and create something called a donor profile. Now, what is a donor profile? What that means is you're trying to find out the type of person that's most likely to donate to your nonprofit. And you can have many different sets of profiles based on what your nonprofit does. You might have different audiences that are interested in your nonprofit. And then you can, once you know what that is, you can tailor some of your activities to solicit donations from those groups. And also go after the communication channels that those groups are typically using. So for example, if you know that your donors, like one set of your donors is skewing older, then maybe using something like TikTok wouldn't be a good idea to reach them. Conversely, if your donors skew young, then putting stuff on LinkedIn or other business-focused social media networks might not be a good idea for them to reach those people. So understanding who your donors are helps you tailor your activities to solicit new donations. So here's some data you can collect. One of the things to keep in mind is when you're going to collect personal information, you need to make sure you're keeping it secure. There are emerging laws for privacy in the US. There's one in California. There's also the EU's privacy law. So you need to be mindful of how you're collecting personal information and how you're storing it and making sure that that's secure. And if that's not a burden that your nonprofit wants to take on, then maybe anonymizing some of this would be an option as well, sort of collecting information, but not collecting things that could be tied to a specific person later on. You might also want to look at, again, why they're giving to your nonprofit. So asking them questions like, what initiative were you hoping we would use your donation for? How did you hear about us? What made you want to donate to us? So those are all things that if you get enough answers to them, it'll really help you clarify why people are donating to your nonprofit, and then tailor communications back to them so that you can solicit more. How to collect this information, one thing that's great to use is a survey. And again, like if you have a donation form, maybe having some questions on it that you can ask people, but you can also follow up to donors with a survey link. Now, not everyone's going to fill it out, so you just need to expect that. But, if you have 100 donors and you send a survey to all of them, you'll get back, 10 or so responses, and that would be good to find out some of this information. You can also research your donors. If you know who they are, you can go look up their profiles on LinkedIn and other social media networks just to understand more about them. And then there's also paid services out there that can help you do this. I listed two there, Donor Search and Donorly. Those would be good if you wanted to find big ticket donors as well, people that are likely to give to your nonprofit because they've given to other nonprofits like yours. Those tools are good ways to find those prospects. And then the last thing I'll say is, just because someone has only made $100 gifts in the past doesn't mean they couldn't be your next major donor, you know, giving 10 times or more of that. And so understanding who they are and how to talk to them is really the key to unlocking those larger donations. And here's some sample survey questions you can ask somebody. So what do they care about? What do they expect from your organization? What do they hope to get from having a relationship with your organization? Is there a specific action that we could take, that the donor could take that would impact the organization, and what might hold them back? And then finally, how do they find out about the nonprofit, and how are their decisions influenced by that? Here are some things to keep in mind as a nonprofit, some of the things you'll need to be able to report back. And so as you're keeping records of donations and donors, these are some of the things that might be useful to you, for you to generate from the information you've probably already collected. Again, I mentioned receipts, like having the ability to produce a receipt way after the donation is important. Looking at donations in aggregate of time-based or from the different demographics they're coming from. How the donations came in, maybe there was a specific marketing campaign or social media campaign that you did, and looking at, was that campaign more effective than other ones you've done because it had more donations come in? So maybe that's a good reason, that's a good way to do the next campaign. That's also an important metric to look at. I mentioned mapping donations to programs and initiatives, and having that full communications loop back to the donor of how their money was spent and how it impacted your program and initiative. That's a great way. And what unlocks that is having a report of how these donations map to the actual spending categories that you have. And then obviously, you know, we do have some federal and state reporting requirements as nonprofits, the 990N for the IRS, and states have other reporting requirements. And so having good donation tracking is essential for that as well. And then finally, if you're familiar with GuideStar, and Candid is the company behind GuideStar, there are a large set of metrics that are on GuideStar's website that can be used by nonprofits to attain their gold and platinum statuses. And I definitely recommend that you look at what it would take to get the different levels on GuideStar. GuideStar, I kind of think of it like the Better Business Bureau for nonprofits. A lot of major donors will go look at your GuideStar profile before they donate to you, and having gold, silver, or platinum on GuideStar really helps give them confidence. And to achieve gold and platinum, there are specific metrics that you need to track for your nonprofit and report back to GuideStar. And they have a whole suite of choices for those metrics, depending on the type of work that your nonprofit does. And it's just a good way, I think, internally as well, to measure your effectiveness as a nonprofit towards your mission, is to look at those menu of metrics that they have and pick out things that make sense for your nonprofit, and then drive those through your staff and your operations to try to make those better as best as you can over time. So for example, if you're an educational nonprofit, you might keep track of how many workshops you've given, how many students students attended your workshops, how many positive survey results you got from your workshops. Those are all metrics that you can report on and measure the effectiveness of what you're doing. The last thing I want to talk about today is a type of software that a lot of nonprofits aren't really familiar with, but that really unlocks a lot of power for them. And it's a software called a CRM, or Customer Relationship Management Tool. And I'm going to highlight the 3 of the top options for CRMs that are specifically tailored for nonprofits. And some of these do require a little bit of IT support, IT help to get going. But once you do that, these really can have a powerful impact on the operations of your nonprofit and your ability to collect donations and track donors and all the things I've been talking about. So the first one I'll mention is Civi Crm. It's essentially the #1 in its category for nonprofits. It's been around for a while. There is an option for it to be used for free, which attracts a lot of nonprofits. You will need to set it up yourself on your own web host or cloud provider. And as I mentioned, as a nonprofit, you can get free credits with Amazon and also Microsoft's Azure cloud provider to do this. And so really this could be a free offering for you if you have the volunteers and other support to set this up. But Civi Crm allows you to set up tracking for donors and take donations, set up tracking for volunteers, and keep track of all the people that you interact with, not just your donors, but also maybe your vendors and other stakeholders you have as you do the operations of your nonprofit. All of these solutions are able to be customized. Civi Crm is probably the hardest to customize. You will need some coding effort to do that, but it is possible. And there are lots of examples of nonprofits customizing Civi Crm very tightly to the operations of their nonprofit and making it a really powerful tool for them. There's also a volunteer management piece called Civi Volunteer that's integrated with Civi Crm, and then donations as well are integrated. Now, setting up that tool, you are kind of locked into their suite of solutions. A lot of times you'll want to integrate other things like Google Drive and Google Docs and maybe other nonprofit software you're using with things like Civi Crm, and that may be a little harder to do than these other ones, but that is an option as well. Zoho is one that's kind of interesting. It's newer. There's a for-profit version of Zoho, and then there's also a nonprofit version that's $12 per year per user. You actually can try that out for free as a nonprofit for up to 3 users, and then kind of keep using it as the commercial version long term. You'll lose some of the nonprofit specific functionality that you're paying for the $12 license. Now, Zoho is great for non-technical people because you can customize just about anything in Zoho just by clicking around in the settings. There's a lot of different tools that Zoho has in their suite. In addition to the CRM component, there are ways to use it for billing and invoicing, project management, and all these other things that you would want software for a business or nonprofit. There's also ways to create your own tools within Zoho, and people have created tools specifically to manage volunteers and to manage donations that you can also use for free as part of their Zoho Creator offering. So you can actually try out tools that other people have made within Zoho for free. And then Zoho has a great story for integrating with other tools. They can integrate with Google and Microsoft and many other software solutions that are out there. And then finally, Microsoft Dynamics. So this is sort of the big dog in the CRM area. Their major competitor is a company called Salesforce. Those are sort of the top 2 of the CRM space. Salesforce does also have a nonprofit offering. I personally don't know that much about it. It's relatively new, but I will be kind of looking into that a little bit more in the future. But I know Microsoft Dynamics pretty well as well. Also, I used to work at Microsoft, but also they've done a lot of work in the last year to make their nonprofit offering better. And so by partnering up with Microsoft with their philanthropy program, you can get connected to a Dynamics implementer for free for your nonprofit, and they can set up Dynamics for you, and it'll be free for you for up to 5 users. Now, this is a tool that is probably better for a larger nonprofit. It's a little bit kind of enterprise grade, not really small business grade. Like Zoho is more like a small business type of software. Dynamics is more for a large nonprofit, but it's still worth a look if you're really serious about setting one of these up. And there are a lot of reports that the nonprofit offering with Dynamics has that are interesting. So for example, there are donation and volunteer management reports that are already created for you that you could just start using right away as soon as this is set up for you. And they have also a really good story with integrations. Obviously, they're going to integrate well with Microsoft tools. So things like Microsoft 365, if you're using that for email and document management, that's tightly integrated. But also they have pretty good stories for Google's Google for Nonprofits and other tools. So now I'm going to show you a couple examples of what these look like. So this is Dynamics. This would be a individual donor record. So this is showing you some of the basics about the donor, their contact info. And you can see on the far right, that bar graph, those are all the donor commitments that that person has given to this nonprofit. So they've basically consistently given $600 a year to the nonprofit. And you can see that right there. So this would be an example of tracking an individual donor and all the different fields that you could keep track of. A lot of times this is very customizable, and then you can do things like you can email the person right from here and then have those emails be tracked. So if you have multiple people servicing your donors, you can reference each other's notes and each other's emails from here. This would be an example of a dashboard that would show you information about donors in aggregate. So in this example, this is looking at all the different households, so individual people living in the same household giving together, and how those break down in terms of type of commitment, which campaign that they map to. So maybe you're doing different activities to solicit donors and how effective those were. And then also getting a total amount over year for all the households. That's on the bottom left there. So this would be, you have all these individual reports and you're able to mix them up into a dashboard and look at all this information at a glance, but also click down into these and filter and sort on all these reports individually too. So again, Microsoft's Microsoft's nonprofit offering has a lot of these reports already built for you. So it's great. And then here's an example of Zoho. So this would be Zoho's individual page for a specific nonprofit. This one's called AT Industries. This is actually the Zoho software for nonprofits, but it's showing an example of a business. And you can see things like the donors and the donations. If you look at the left nav, there's a bunch of different other elements to this tool. You can keep track of notes on that individual nonprofit, also the documents you're attaching, and then you see things like opportunities and activities. So a lot of times CRMs are used by sales teams where they are looking at sales leads and how they map to potential sales of the product or service that the company is offering. Those would be called opportunities. And then a win would be a real sale. And so often with sales teams, you have this whole funnel that you're trying to manage of how potential customers come in to your to the radar of the sales team and how those people are serviced. Nonprofit donors are a lot like that. You're trying to look at potential donors and then talk to them and then close them out as wins. And so a lot of the language you see like activities and opportunities is around that. And then here's another example from Zoho. This would be an individual donation and how it came in for a campaign. And so you can see some of the details of the campaign, like the start and end date, the expected revenue, and then how many total donors came in for that. And again, on the left navigation, you can see some additional other screens that this might have, like volunteer opportunities and people that have registered as a volunteer in different campaigns. So basically that's the examples I wanted to show you. And now I'll go ahead and take any questions you guys have.
So before I throw it out there for questions, I'm gonna give my 2 cents on a few things, and then reopen it up to questions again. So just a couple of things that I wanted to share, and I put some stuff into the chat box as well. So you're free to browse that information as well. For record keeping and receipts, you are required to give a receipt for any donation $250 and over for the year. So if they give you $50 today and they give you $100 in June and $150 in December, you have to give them a receipt. So you should receipt all of your donations at the time. The other thing that you must do according to the IRS in your receipt is that if you give something for that donation, let's say that they come to a silent auction, or you want a fundraiser where they get a t-shirt for their donation, you have to give them a receipt that states that they received something, what it was, and how much it was worth. So let's say that you were giving out t-shirts and it's a $20 donation, but the cost of the t-shirt is $10. So you state you gave out a t-shirt, you took a $20 donation, but the shirt was $10 because the donor can only deduct $10. They can only deduct the difference between the fair market value of the item they received and the donation amount, right? So that's true like for anything that they're receiving something from you for that donation. So make sure you're doing that. And if you have any questions on that, I have a sample receipt that I'm happy to share with people. And it's a pretty comprehensive receipt that includes everything from in-kind donations to cash, and has all of the language that you need. You also always have to provide your tax ID number on your receipts. So that's required as well. Let's see, what relationship? Oh, yeah, so James mentioned something about relationships with your donors and what kind of relationship the donor wants to have. And I think this is a really important point because donors sometimes want a different kind of relationship. Some people just want to give you money and they don't care. Other people want to know about where their donation is going and what you did with it. Other people want to be invited to come and come to your events, or if you're going to have a special kind of event where you're trying to get information from your donors, they might want to participate in a group of that. Sometimes people like to meet the other donors, so understanding what kinds of things your donor wants in return for their relationship with your organization becomes a really important tool for donor stewardship and maintaining those donors, because you don't just want a donor that gives you $100 today and goes away. You want donors that gives you $100 today, $100 next month, $500 the following month, $1,000. You want them to grow as donors with you. So donor stewardship is just as important as trying to recruit brand new donors. So that relationship becomes really important. What do they want from your organization for donating to it? What are their expectations? And I think you'll really see a growth in your donations when you really understand and know your donors. Reporting requirements on 990s. I do not suggest that any nonprofit file the 990N. The 990N is a filing for organizations that are 50,000 and under. And of course, if you're 50,000 and under, you can definitely do that. But you could also file the 990EZ or the 990 regular. And the reason to do that is, number one, foundations that you would want to write for grants prefer that you have a 990EZ. A 990EZ is reportable on GuideStar and provides more detail and information about your organization. And many donors will go to GuideStar and they won't see anything on the 990N. The 990N is this little tiny postcard. All it says is, yes, we were 50,000 and under. But if you do a 990EZ, you're reporting the details of where you're spending your money and what you did with it, the programs that you have. It is a marketing tool, and it's a fantastic marketing tool that is public, that shares all your information. So I recommend at a minimum that all nonprofits file a 990EZ. And it is required by many foundations that you have a 990EZ and not a 990N. If you are over, I believe it's 250,000, you do need to file the 990 regular, which requires a lot more information. And if you need help with your 990s or your GuideStar updates, I do those kind of things as well, and I can help. Where to find donors. Another little thing that I do, particularly working in the arts organizations, I would go to shows that had, and this is with any nonprofit, but I would get the programs, and on the back of the programs, often it would list out their donors or the foundations they were working with and things like that. So sometimes you can go to similar nonprofits and find out who their donors are if they share that information. Now, you're not required to share your donor information unless a foundation wants you to do so. You don't have to share your donors. Sometimes people like to do that because it kind of shows that they have this broad donor support. But it's also kind of nice to know, hey, what foundation is supporting what kind of organization, because I might be able to apply for a grant for them as well. Or, oh, these people, I actually know them, and now I know that they support these kind of nonprofits. So that's another place that I go, is to other nonprofits to find out who their donors are, and if they would be interested in donating to my organization as well. So those were just a couple of little tidbits that I had. So I'm going to stop talking and open it back up. And if you have any questions for either James or I, we're available.
I've got a question for you, Linda, actually. If a nonprofit has already filed their 990N, the little postcard one, can they go file an EZ or the regular one afterwards? No, they're locked in, huh?
Yep. Yeah. Once they file it for that year, then they're locked in for that year. But they can change it the following year. But I will say that you can't go backwards. So once you file a 990EZ, you can't go back and file a 990N in the future. You have to keep filing a 990EZ. Once you file a 990 regular, usually I think you're locked into filing that 990 regular. So kind of pick that lane, and then, but you can always progress upwards with the 990s. So you can always do that the following year. The way that you make those changes, like in GuideStar, you can put that financial information into GuideStar. So that's a really good way to make sure they have that detail. But in terms of them uploading a 990, they don't really upload postcards. They upload EZs and regulars. Also, with your charitable solicitations registration with the state that you have to file, both in Colorado and in Washington, you put in that detail. And even if you file the 990N, you still have to put in that detail. But just like with GuideStar and the IRS, 990Ns aren't reportable, like they don't record them in the same way that they do with the 990EZs. So you still have to have your 990EZ with the state if you do that, but you also will put in your detailed information even if you did a 990N. So
Thanks a lot.
Other questions? Do any of you already use, or have you considered CRMs for your donation setups? Is this all new for you?
Mostly. I thought about, I was looking into donor search the other day for our nonprofit, and sort of been waffling on it. Haven't quite decided whether we want to use it.
Gotcha. What's the questions that you're asking about whether or not it's good for your nonprofit?
Just mostly like, is the cost going to be worth it? Just how likely are we to get new donors through donor search? I know there's a lot of good information on there, but we are relatively small and not super well known. So, that there's a trade-off there.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. Like, how much will it, it's the same thing with marketing. Like, if I do this marketing, how much will that actually earn me in the marketing piece? So it is kind of a marketing tool in a way, and it depends on how you end up using it, that it could end up being beneficial. I think what's interesting, especially for new nonprofits, which is primarily what I work with, is new nonprofits, you can, like, they'll get going and then they'll be like 3-5 years down the road, and then they'll be like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have started that early on, because now I'm like, I have to upload all this information and I don't have it in the same way, and it's it's harder for them as they get moving forward, and then they're like, now we need it. So sometimes I hear that they're like, well, we didn't think it was important at first, but now, gosh, we really need something. And so it's kind of that balance of like, when is the right time to jump into a CRM for that? Do you have any thoughts on that, James?
No, I agree. Starting early with it is good, and some of these offerings I showed today are free. So it takes a little bit of time to set them up by the staff or the volunteers, but you can recruit a volunteer that has experience doing it, and they can maybe set it up for you. But getting into the habit of using it, it's a lot easier at the beginning of a nonprofit than when it gets larger, for sure.
Just out of curiosity, how much is the Donorly and the donor search program?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I know they both are paid offerings, so.
Yeah, I think it's negotiable. I know there was somebody who called when we put in an inquiry about it, and I think it was like, I want to say it was like 3,000 or something like that, which, I mean, it's a big chunk, and I don't remember if that's like upfront or if you can pay incrementally, but I do remember thinking, that's an investment. I would want to know that we were going to see results from this. So yeah, still haven't made up our minds about that one.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant expense for a small nonprofit. And you do have to balance, like, what can we do ourselves to be able to grow our donor base without utilizing those tools, and when is the right time to really utilize those tools? So it kind of is a balance, especially with the new nonprofits. I just know that the ones that are continuing to regress and to grow, they get to that point where they're like, oops, I should have done this 2 years ago. So when you get to that place where you're like thinking, this might work out. So I like the idea that James has too, about trying to use some of the free options at first and kind of see how that works out, and if it is something that works for your nonprofit. But regardless, you're going to be tracking your donors, and everybody should know who their donors are, and have access to that detail. And it's really interesting when you get new people into the organization and you have a list of donors. Some people know people, like, you can look through donors and be like, hey, I know a person who's not on your donor list, I can reach out to them. Or I know this person, they haven't donated in a couple of years, I bet I could reach out to them and get them back engaged and involved. So different people having different relationships can come into your organization and reinvigorate certain donors and relationships. But you won't know that unless you have a tracking method for your donors, and you're actively managing that. Just like if a for-profit would with their sales funnel, nonprofits do the same thing with their donor funnel.
And if you don't know what your donor funnel is, or understand that term, you should learn about what that is. You can do some research on the internet about what a donor funnel is, and how to look at your nonprofit that way, and how to generate marketing campaigns that will help find leads for you, find potential donors for you. and then how to service those potential donors and convert them into real donors.
Yeah, there's a whole like process, like you have the people that are prospects and might be donors, and then you've got the people who become a donor, but they're a small donor, and then you've got the retention of those donors and the growth of those donors, that donor stewardship, and then there's donor appreciation and how you appreciate your different donors and how you continue to keep them, and you're working that all the time. Get new donors, keep existing donors, appreciate your donors, and then it just becomes like this big circle of trying to maintain and steward all of those donors that you're building on. And the bigger and bigger that you got, the more intense that gets. And then you'll have, like, sometimes what I'll see when people get to that place where they're like, we can't manage all of the donors, so we're only going to pay attention to the top 20%. And that becomes, then they get this like drop off, because they're not paying attention to all their donors, but they've made a conscious decision to, like, we don't have enough to be able to do that. And sometimes donor management software can help be able to manage that a little bit better and really figure out what donors you should be going after and not, because maybe there are some people that really are only going to donate once, and they decided that your organization isn't what they want to support, which is fine. But it'd be nice if you knew that. Like, it'd be nice, it'd be nice if you had a conversation with them and they'd be like, we're really not interested in supporting this. Or, oh, absolutely, we love what you're doing. And, we were just donating to these other organizations, but this year we're going to donate to you, So it's kind of interesting. You never know what you're going to find. And that $50 donor could one day be a $5,000 donor. You just never know.
Do any of those CRM softwares integrate with like MailChimp for automated mailings?
Yeah, they do. And MailChimp has some features as well that are of interest to some of these things we're talking about when you're trying to generate campaigns that service specific groups of donors. You can make things like segments in MailChimp to segment out the part. If you have a big pool of people that are signed up for your newsletter, being able to segment that into, here's one set of donors that matches a profile, here's another set, and then you tailor the messaging that you're sending out to those groups so that it's more likely to reach them and resonate with them.
Could somebody talk a little bit about the integration between volunteer management and CRM management? Because I think about 70% of what we get from the public is volunteer work. So,
yeah, I can take a stab at that. The last month I talked about volunteer management, so you can check out the recording from last month. But I showed essentially a way to track volunteers and recruit volunteers and understand what skill sets volunteers have. A lot of these CRMs, you could use them to track your volunteers in the same way you track donor profiles, contact information for the volunteer, different other things you want to know about the volunteer, like how many hours they volunteered and what was their most recent time volunteering for you, total hours they've ever done it, when was the first time they volunteered for you, kind of keeping track of that, knowing if people are coming back to volunteer for you, why they volunteer for you, survey results for that. And so the CRMs can do all those things just like they can with donor profiles. And then the other thing you could do is have a way for the volunteers to submit information to you, like, again, a survey result or filling out a time card or reporting hours. That can also feed into the CRM. And a lot of these, like Civi Crm and Zoho, both have solutions to do that.
James, is there a way to easily plug in survey programs like Google Forms or something like that? So if somebody fills out a survey, it goes directly into a CRM?
Yeah, Google and Microsoft both have integration layers. Microsoft's is called Power Automate. and Google has one as well. And Zoho actually has stuff as well like this, where you can connect somebody filling out a Google form with actions on the CRM side. So it's a way to kind of tie different solutions together. And I know for Google Forms, there's a way to actually have it save into a spreadsheet.
Right.
And then you could import the data from the spreadsheet into these as well that way too.
Cool.
Any other questions you guys have?
Very cool. I love all of this information because I actually don't do as much work with the with actual software programs as much. So I always love when I can get some additional information on that. So thank you very much, James. And this video will also be available on the Meetup group, I believe, right? That's where we're posting them. Yeah. So, and last month's is also on the Meetup group. So as long as you're on the Meetup, you should be able to get, you know, all of that information. And any requests for what you want to see for next month?
You know, I don't know if this would be something for next month, but I would really like to hear somebody talk about charging for fees and services as a nonprofit, because there seems to be a real lack of understanding that, like, just among people in general about charging if you're a nonprofit, and that actually is a significant portion of nonprofit revenue. But, you know, I think a lot of people don't quite get that. So maybe something about explaining that or what the details are. That's just something that I'm confronted with a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. We could do something on that earned income piece. You know, there's many different forms of income for nonprofit organizations, and earned income is definitely one of those, and we can definitely charge fees for services. But there's also some limitations that the IRS has around that. So understanding, you know, what we're allowed to do, and being able to communicate that with people, and letting people know that, you know, this is an appropriate use of funding source for nonprofits. So yeah, we can definitely have a conversation on that.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. And is there a time of it? Let me know if there's other thoughts that people have, because, you know, we can do grant writing, and we can do like, there's so many different topics. I was just at a really great one this week on partnerships and developing different kinds of partnerships, whether that be with corporations or with other nonprofits, or, you know, just establishing that and how we can work on partnerships. It's really critical and important for all nonprofits to be able to establish partnerships, and there's so many different kinds of partnerships. So that's a really good one. And co-branding with corporations, corporate giving kind of programs that can be set up, or things like that if people are interested. Grant writing, grant strategic planning, things like that we can talk about. So there's so many different options, and I love talking about compliance. It's my thing too. I love talking about compliance, about the policies and the bylaws, and the duties of board of directors, the 3 duties of board of directors, and you know, how to manage your board and things like that. So those are topics we can have as well. So, and then I was also curious what time of day or what days of the month are good for people, because I'm not sure that we're set yet on like a specific day of the month or a specific time of the day. So any thoughts on that?
So I realize I'm weird on this, but I kind of like it, having it during normal business hours, as opposed to, you know, going and doing, you know, a workshop at like 6 p.m. when I'm trying to do stuff at home and cook dinner and whatnot, or on weekends or something like that. So this normal business hours works for me. But
I agree with that.
Yeah, I'm kind of a normal business hours person as well. So that's good. But lunchtime versus later in the day doesn't matter. Okay. Cool.
If we ever
Well-
go back to normal things, you know, you could do a lunchtime meeting in a restaurant or a pub or something like that, and that'd be cool.
Yeah, which is what we were doing. We were meeting in downtown Seattle, and you know, we had a few different locations. So it is very possible that we'll go back to in person. We could do a combination of in person and online. I've also liked not driving and not parking. And I don't know, but it has saved the environment in a lot of different ways. I know when the pandemic first was happening in China, they showed pictures of no smog, and the difference between what you saw, you know, on a regular before pre-pandemic, and then what it was like after they had been staying home for a month, and it was clear, like the skies were clear, and the Chinese people were so surprised that they could see now. And then the animals that were like traipsing through the city, the empty city streets, I just thought it was hilarious. But I do think environmentally it's been really good for us as well. But I do miss in-person contact with people. And I think that there's some value to that. So we'll see what happens as we're able to get back together and people feel more comfortable being together again.
Combination sounds great because you know, I would love to invite some other people who are part of our organization, and they're all over the place. Like we have a board member in Maryland and one's in Ohio, so of course I can't exactly invite them to a Seattle pub for lunch. So definitely would like to have, you know, be able to invite them.
Cool. Great, BC. I have this woman who does corporate giving presentations, and so maybe I'll invite her. I'll see if she's available. She's just dynamite and does this for a living, does corporate giving for a living. So I might bring her in. Yes, and so Catherine, I think that'd be great. I kind of like the idea of moving. I mean, I'm in Seattle now, and so, you know, I connected with this group because I wanted to meet people in Seattle. So I'm still thinking that we might do some kind of in-person things here in Seattle. But I also really like the idea of opening this up to people around the country that can participate. And I think that we learn a lot from everybody, and the more that we can be connecting. It's called networking for nonprofits for a reason. And what I really like is being able to connect other nonprofits and have them start to really work together or hear each other. And that's kind of what I really wanted to do, was to create a space for networking. And it's always nice to get a little bit of education in that, and it keeps conversation going and stuff. But I'd like to see that continue, either in person and or online. And if we're online, we can be anywhere in the country or world. All right. Very cool. Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll send out our next monthly meeting, and we'll come up with a topic and see what we can offer to people. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope to see you again in the near future.
Yeah.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Linda. It's nice to meet you, Catherine and Jason. I look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah.
Sounds good. You
all
take
of you.
care. So good to see you, BC, and great to see all of you. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.